Hello and welcome to Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Gabe.
And I'm Wil.
And joining us this week is one of my personal favorites in the industry and someone we had on back in episode 50 is Jen Udden. Jen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Round of applause and everything.
So we're almost 100 episodes since your last visit with us has aired.
Oh my God.
Which equates to like 3 years. And a lot has changed over the last few years. So I'm going to give you the chance and opportunity for our listeners, for those that are new, and maybe some people who don't know you, which is hard to believe. But could you introduce yourself and who you are and who you're with?
Absolutely. So, as you said, my name is Jennifer Udden. I was an agent for 10 years in what I'm calling my first round. I was with the Donald Moss agency. I was with Barry Goldblatt for a bit, and then I was with New Leaf. And then I took a little break during the panini and did some freelance editing, did some temp work, worked for a random comic book company, which was a huge nightmare, but that's another story. Self-published a romance novel. And then I was like, you know what? I really miss being a literary agent. So I started asking around to see if anyone remembered that I had been a person once upon a time. And I am now with the Dail agency, which is in a very funny full circle moment housed in the same office building as the Donald Moss agency offices were when I first started in the industry. Like the same doorman, everything. I was like, I know this elevator.
That's funny.
So we're a pretty small boutique literary agency. I'm the 6th employee, which feels very fancy. But we focus on a wide range of commercial fiction. My list, as I'm rebuilding it, is focusing mostly on, or actually entirely on, genre fiction for adults. So fantasy, science fiction, romance, romantasy, horror, some mystery thriller, and then sort of crossovers of all genres. So I've been back for about 6 weeks. So y'all are getting me in the honeymoon period.
Oh, we're lucky. I love it.
Well, like, some of us may have had your name at the top of their top agents list with a star next to it, just waiting. So won't name any names of myself, but
well, it's funny to be back because, you know, I've definitely had writers query me who are like, I'm just so excited you're back. Like, I wanted to query you before, but then you left. But I've also had editors approach me because they're like, your list was so good. You had such great taste. And I'm just like, please say more nice things about me. This is great.
Yeah, when I saw that, I got really excited. And you can ask Wil, he sent it to me, your announcement. And I was like, I saw it, got so excited. I saw it 3 days later again, got re-excited because I'd forgotten somehow. And he was like, I sent that to you. So
story of our friendship.
That sounds about right.
Really,
yep.
It really is. I forget a lot of things, but I'm happy to have you back. I know, you're fresh back into this for round 2, as you call it, right?
Yeah.
And round 1 was incredible too. And I know we've got some questions lined up for you tonight to kind of get to know you a little bit as you're here to build up again and things like that. Have questions around how to query better, what we could prepare for, and some of the things that you've learned across your journey in both round 1, intermediate, and now going into round 2. So I have a few questions for you, but I'm going to kick it off to Wil to do our traditional first question for all of our interviews.
Why is he saying no?
Why?
I'll do it.
This is your question, Mr. Wil. You always ask this one question.
Jen, we're so professional. Can you tell?
Yeah, we're on top of it, Jen.
We're doing great.
My
I love
podcast is like a bottle of wine in the corner, so it's great.
I love it. So how would you describe your career in 3 words that are completely they don't have to be connected at all?
Curious, enthusiastic, weird. I guess.
Okay. That's great.
I kind of approached, in the first round of being an agent, I kind of approached things just with an air of like, let's try it. Let's try it and see how it works. And as I grew my list and sort of gained more confidence in my own abilities, I was able to pick sort of more and more idiosyncratic things to take bets on that, you know, initially may not have looked like they paid off, but then later paid off, you know, really big. So that's the sort of weird aspect of it. It's like, no, I promise this book about a female cannibal is going to be a huge hit. And no one believed me. And now it's got 10 million likes on Book Talk and has sold like 100,000 copies. So,
Dang.
Wow.
so I guess that's my answer. And even, you know, in my little break after agenting, I just sort of, any opportunity that came my way, I would sort of say yes to. Not in a kind of improv way, but like in a way of like, this sounds like an interesting opportunity. I'm curious about this. Like, I didn't know anything about comic books when I took the job for the comic book company that I worked for a hot minute. And I didn't love it there, but I learned a lot about an art form that I'd always been curious about and interested in, and didn't know anything about like how it was made or like what people value in comics the way that they, you know, as opposed to books. So it was an interesting experience, even though it wasn't a very, you know, long-lived or personally fulfilling one. It was certainly interesting.
Yeah, comics is a grind. You know, like
It's
just
a weird place. It's a weird place.
Real.
Well,
it is.
Yeah, it was a weird toxic situation that I kind of inadvertently found myself in. Like, oops, yikes.
So
there's some interpersonal here that I'm not aware of.
when you think of like curious, do you think of it not even just like curious as in who you decide to take on? Because you said, you know, like certain things people would probably be like, no, you were like, no, this is going to do great. Like, where does that kind of stem from? Like, why pick things that maybe are off the beaten path to most people?
I think it's because that's kind of, it's always how I've approached my reading, right? I've never been a sort of purist of like, I'm only going to read science fiction. I'm only going to read fantasy. I only read, you know, X, Y, and Z. I've always been sort of a very eclectic, you know, I would go to I don't know if y'all are familiar with Half Price Books. It's a Texas used bookstore chain.
Yeah.
It's the best. There was one across the street from my house growing up. And the great thing about a used bookstore is that you can just go through and you can get 10 books for like under $20. And I would just spend afternoons there, just pulling stuff off the shelf and like getting interested. So I think that I have always had that spirit of like, oh, this is interesting. Like, let me find out about this. And so when I think about, you know, looking at books that I want to represent, like I want to have enthusiasm for it. I want to think that it's fun, and having something that is a little bit off the beaten path and a little bit unusual makes me sort of feel like I want to fight for it more. So I think that's another aspect of it. It's like, it also, I'm just very competitive. So I'm like, yeah, no, this is great. And I'm going to prove it to you.
I love that. Nick, do you want to, because I'll keep going, Nick. So like, you have to take over.
Do you want to unpack these words?
I think she kind of did.
I mean, I feel like we're unpacking them, you know, like I just didn't use that verbiage. So like, yeah. All right. Well, you know what? I do have a question, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let me go first, Nick, and then you can jump in. You know, when I think about like who your past list was, the one that really like jumps up and I feel like was really a risk, but it was not, because in my head it was so good, was K.M. Sparza's Dail.
That fucking book. Oh my God. I love that book. I love that book so much. And First Becomes Ashes, his follow-up, was also just one of those books that like should not have worked, but did. And it was one of those things where I read it and I thought, this is a person who's taking a risk with a lot of very, very heavy themes, very heavy world building. But it just seems so logical to me, because I was like, this is the extension of the world we live in now. Like, it's dark and it's very upsetting, but like, I can absolutely see. And of course, I was like, oh no, Kellen, you're a witch and you predicted the future. And he's like, I don't like that. I don't want that. So, but yeah, I mean, he had been querying that book for a while and he hadn't gotten a lot of traction. And, you know, we had bonded because we had gone to, we had been at the same conference together. I think it was World Fantasy up in Saratoga Springs. And we had bonded because we had both read a lot of the same fan fiction. Well, we had read fan fiction in the same fandom, but he had read like a lot of like darker shit than I had in this fandom. And so I knew that he was a person who, was going to be really passionate about sticking to his guns in a way, like sticking to his guns, like, this is the story I want to tell. I'm not going to soften it. I'm not going to like dial it back. And we were lucky enough that there was actually a lot of interest in that book. And I absolutely believe that he's going to be one of those people that like in 100 years, we're going to be talking about his books as like absolutely at the forefront. But yeah, I remember when I told people, I was like, yeah, so it's this great book. It's about sex slavery. Like, I promise it's really great about like debtors, prison, and sex slavery. It's great.
I love that book. Okay,
Yay.
Nick, now you can take over.
Now I can take over. Okay, thank you so much. I just want to make sure everyone knows as well. Down in the show notes, we will have Jen's manuscript wish list. Just to kind of like give a teaser here, Jen, what is on your wish list right now?
Right now, I'm looking for, I forget all the sort of comps that I list in my actual manuscript wish list, but, I'm really looking for books that make me just obsessed right away. So things that I want, I want a big space opera like Arkady Martine's A Memory Called Empire. I want big fantasy. I want, even if it doesn't sort of feel like big, quote unquote, like empire stakes, I want it to feel big and important to the characters. I'm like looking at my shelves thinking like, oh, what's on here that I want to kind of like highlight. I basically, anything, I want to see anything in adult genre. So fantasy, science fiction, romantasy, romance, horror. I'm really interested in horror right now, actually. I just finished Catriona Ward's Last House on Needless Street, which I don't know if you all have read. It's so good. Any kind of atmospheric, smart, cerebral horror, even if it's a little gross, sort of like Gretchen Felker Martin's Manhunt. I don't know if you all have read that. Really interested in horror right now. And people are doing such weird things in romance and it makes me so happy. Like I just read a book about like it's a polyamorous like gargoyle romance. I was like, sure, why not? You're all made of stone, but you still have penises that work. Like, sure, why not? I just love how weird people are getting. It's fabulous. But yeah, I'm probably gonna skew a little bit more commercial at the start of things because I kind of have to do a speed run of like rebuilding my list, right? I have one client right now, and so I've got to kind of do a pretty quick rebuilding of my list. I had 33 clients, I think, when I left agenting the last time.
Oh, wow.
So I'm probably going to skew a little bit more commercial. I'm probably going to not get quite as weird and funky as I would like in the first couple years. But eventually I know that I'll get back to my old weird shit. So
we're here for that. Just so we're very clear about that. Bring on the weird.
I feel like I can still get weird, even with my mainstream stuff. But I'd love to find a really strong like crime franchise. Like I feel like we're with the rise of like cozy fantasy and romantasy. I feel like we're gonna sort of reinvent the cozy mystery, which I love. I would love to have a reinvention of like the intersection of like cozy fantasy and like urban fantasy. Like I miss urban fantasy personally. I miss urban fantasy. I miss paranormal romance. I'm like, I want a werewolf who is solving crime in Chicago and he has a love interest and they have a will they, won't they thing. Like bring that on personally.
Well, I got a pitch for a novel for you. It's about a werewolf detective in Chicago.
Perfect.
I can hear all our listeners taking notes. Okay, so this is what I should be writing. Okay.
Well, maybe not that exact thing.
Right,
but,
for sure.
I think that we're long overdue for that kind of thing. And, cozy romance is a thing. Cozy fantasy is a thing. All the editors are asking for it. And I like reading it. So, things that have like stakes, but not like the world is ending. I'm like, maybe we just need to solve a murder or, save the bakery or whatever.
I love cozy fantasy savoring the town bakery.
I mean, Legends and Lattes, which I did not personally love. Like a lot of people really, really love that book. And I understand why. Like, it's that sense of, belonging and welcome and, small stories are welcome too. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be the protagonist of an epic quest. You could just have like a hot girlfriend who like makes lattes. Like that's also fine. So I get the appeal.
For sure.
Yeah, I like that. So you mentioned that you wrote a romance.
I did.
Can you tell us? Can you tell us about that? I have some questions regarding that, but I want to know about your romance and kind of that experience. But what did you write?
It's called Marrying In. It's a arranged marriage, like mafia adjacent story. I had been reading a lot of mafia romance because I'd watched this mafia like TV show from Thailand, and I was very dissatisfied with a lot of the stuff that I was reading because all of the heroes, like all the love interests, were these like jacked, enormous assholes who were just like throwing the woman around and just being like a huge dick. And I was just like, this is not doing anything for me. And I was like, what if? And so the female lead is this woman who is this sort of traumatized shut-in who got kidnapped when she was younger, and because she's from this family that's sort of one generation away from being like total gangsters, and so they've like, you know, they're made men, but they're now sort of like corporate and, you know, legit. But she's like not left her house in 10 years. So one day her dad comes to her and is like, you got to do something for the family and you got to marry this guy from this rival family. And she's like, no, I don't wish to. But he turns out to be like a really great, like sort of golden retriever-y guy. And they, you know, strangers to married to lovers was the vibe. So it was really fun to work on. It was just something that I had sort of an idea to do. And, you know, when I was coming up as an agent, there were pretty strong feelings about, and I think for good reasons, about whether or not you would want an agent who is also a writer. And I think that people's concern about that is totally valid. And these days, you know, when I'm offering rep to people, I do say, like, I do write on the side. It's not my main focus. This is like my job is, you know, to be an agent, and that's like my priority. But it was sort of liberating to be like, oh yeah, I could just do this. I could just write this weird, horny thing that I want to write. Because I'm a freelance editor and a temp, and no one cares. So it was tremendously freeing creatively. And I decided to self-publish it because I knew that it wasn't, you know, even though I wasn't agenting, like all my friends are still in books. So I was still pretty plugged into the community. And I was like, this is not what the market wants right now. It's not a rom-com. You couldn't give this a cute illustrated cover. So I decided to self-publish it. And then I got incredibly cold feet about promoting it because I still felt very weird about like putting myself forward in that way. So it's only sold about 120 copies, which apparently is very good for a self-published novel. So I'm pretty pleased with it.
Wow. Yeah, I've got it pulled up right now. We'll provide a link for this one as well.
That's very kind of you.
Oh yeah, it'll be in the show notes for sure.
We'll buy. All the show notes will be all things Jen. It's gonna be great.
My one client was like, I read it. It's so good. I was like, you don't have to tell me it's good if you don't like it. She's like, no, you really think it was good? I was like, I've already signed you. You don't have to blow smoke up my ass.
Awesome. Will, did you have a thing?
Well, yeah, I do. So I guess, what do you think is the concerns people have if their agent is also a writer? Because like I work in TV and film a lot, and I found it the best directors were actors, that they really understood where they're coming from.
Well, I think, you know, that's certainly a bonus. Like, I feel like I do have a stronger insight into my client's writing process now because I've been through it, and I'm currently in it with book 2, where I'm just like, I would like to finish this someday before I die, but I'm just so stalled. But I think that because in a very strong way, I think that people are concerned that, especially if their agent is writing in the same category, that they would sort of have an advantage. Or there's sort of like a lesser concern about like, oh, maybe my agent's actually just going to be like plagiarizing my work or like taking ideas from me. But I think that there is a sense in which like, oh, I don't want to be in competition for my agent. So, I mean, I have been working on a fantasy novel for the better part of like 3 years. And eventually I'm going to finish that. And eventually, hopefully I'll query that. But I'm not going to like represent it myself. I'm going to query it the same way that anyone else would. I'm going to use my real name. But I think that it's just a concern of like, is my agent going to put their own creative career before mine? And I think that that's valid. I think because, you know, they're thinking about their own career and like, well, would I put myself first? Would I put my clients first? So I get it. I just feel like the only way to really way to really do it is to be very upfront about it, be very transparent, and also like not try to pretend that, like, I would never pretend that my struggles as a writer are the same as my clients' writers, because I am an insider. I'm a gatekeeper. I have a ton of knowledge that they don't have. And my journey is going to be shaped by that, for better or worse. And my job for my client is to help them achieve their goals and give them my knowledge and like have them benefit from my knowledge. So I don't know. I do understand that there is kind of like not like a power imbalance, but like a privilege imbalance that I get why people are concerned about it.
So how do you then like to work with your writers that you take on? Or do you like to be in the developmental part? Or are you more like they write it, they hand it to you, and you're like, I'm going to go out and we're going to sell this?
It varies depending on the stage that we're at. So, I mean, so when I sign someone, they've got a finished novel. I almost always give them editorial feedback. They revise it, and then we go out on submission. You know, where I get in on the developmental stage is when we're on submission, they're like, what do I do next? Because I like to have at least a say, or like offer my opinion on what I think might be the best, most viable next project. Because, you know, authors have ideas, and some ideas are more marketable than others. And so that's where I like to be involved developmentally. But like, I don't necessarily like to dictate what my clients write next, unless there's sort of like a very clear contractual reason to do so. Like, you are contracted to write 2 more books in this series. You must write them next, or you will be in breach of contract and Random House will sue you. So I really only like to be involved in terms of like guidance on what I think might work best as the next book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Go ahead, Nick.
So let's talk about the journey a little bit. Round 1, then we do some freelancing and do some writing. Now we're back in round 2 of agenting. What, from your experience in the gap, if you will, right, being freelancer and writing, what did you learn in that position that you're applying to round 2 to make you a better agent?
That's a really good question. I think the biggest thing that I learned is, you know, because I was freelancing and I had to manage all these projects, you know, basically on my own. Before, you know, in my last 2 agencies, I was a 1099 person, but like it was still company shaped. So I still had, you know, meetings to attend and, you know, outside pressures and things like that, you know, it was like having an office job. I just didn't have, you know, the security of like health insurance. But when you're freelancing, you know, you have to hit the deadlines or else you don't get paid. So I really feel like this time I'm able to sort of look at a project and gauge exactly how much work it needs. And then I've been able to turn around edits so quickly. Like the first project I signed, I had edits to her, I think 7 days later. And when she sent those revisions back to me incredibly quickly, I was like, you didn't take enough time. I know that you didn't, because you sort of get a sense of how, of where things are in like their process. Like, is this a real thing yet? And if it's not quite there, you sort of, when you're freelancing, you kind of have to figure out how far along it is and how much work you need to do and how much pushing you need to do. So I feel like my time management is much better because I had to hit those deadlines or else I wouldn't get paid and then I couldn't pay my rent. And also I have, I think, an even strong, I had a good sense of this before, but I have an even stronger sense now of like how much work something's going to need and the kind of work that will really smooth any barriers to publication. Because at the end of the day, like, I don't need to get it perfect. I just need to get it into an editor's hands who's going to love it and who's going to take it, you know, the next step, because editors want to feel that ownership too. So the project I'm working on now needed very little work because she's just such an amazing writer. So I was able to sort of point out some large areas of feedback. I was like, we need, you know, some grounding in this area, especially in this, you know, first half of the book. And then we need like X, Y, and Z in the second half. And I feel like I feel like I also have a lot more confidence in my own taste and judgment, because there's not really time for dilly-dallying. There's not time for me to kind of waffle on a book. I either love it or I don't. Yeah.
Gabe?
So I'm wondering, you're talking about like in the macro scale of getting a book. Like, what would you say for writers, for example, that have struggles with dyslexia or English as a second language, that you get a story and like this is a good storyteller. The other writer might not have either the skills yet, like might take years, or they don't have the resources to get it looked at, having the friends or the money or whatever.
No, that's definitely an issue. I mean, I will say that, in terms of things like, grammar and like, English as a second language, a lot of times that is less of a problem than you think. Because if someone is talented, that kind of comes through. Like, I've taken on books from people who, English wasn't their first language. They're not great with grammar. They're dyslexic. Like, I've taken on those books before, and like, it kind of comes through, because strong writing is about seeing a story, and that tends to kind of be evident on the page. It's real. I mean, I won't lie and say that it's like really easy to find these resources to like have, find ways to improve your manuscript or find ways to improve as a writer. There are a ton of like communities out there. I mean, I think that probably the community you guys have fostered, like through the podcast, like even that is, great for people to be able to access this huge wealth of knowledge of all these episodes you've recorded, of people you've interviewed and writers you've interviewed. Because so much of it at the end of the day isn't about like how much money you spent on a freelance editor, or how much, you spent on an MFA program. It's about, can you tell a story and have people resonate with it? And that's the kind of thing that almost can't be taught. I was talking to an editor today. I've been doing the Bataan Death March of like editor meetings. I've had like 5 a week. It's been very intense. And we were talking about romance and how specifically romance is such a hard thing to teach, because it is so formulaic, but you have to deploy it in a way where you can't see the formula, where like, the formula is working, that the formula is happening. That the scaffolding is there, but you can't be aware of the scaffolding, because then it ruins the moment. It takes you absolutely out of like the tension and the feeling. And so you can teach someone sort of like the mechanics of how a sentence works or how a plot works, but there's something about strong storytelling that you either sort of have or you don't, which is a bummer, but I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh no, totally. It's encouraging, really. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Will.
It's interesting to hear about like, I don't want to say talent, because I think talent can also be cultivated, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I really wish, and I don't know if this is happening, what astounds me, especially when we have these campaigns like we need diverse books, which is super important. Why aren't the publishers creating resources in these undeveloped neighborhoods and working with educational resources to make, first of all, kids readers, and then also writers? It just, to me, seems like as a capitalistic format, one, you would get a tax write-off for creating a charity. And also you would be developing the next generation of readers and writers. And we do need different stories. I'm constantly craving differences. Like, I feel like that's the only way you can grow as a reader and a writer, is to read outside of your comfort zone. And it still can be fantasy if that's your genre that you want to write in, but like, read an author that maybe, you wouldn't write or you wouldn't read. Like, Nick was really into like straight white boy fantasy. That's his term, not mine. And
it is my term. I say it all the time, and like, I never regret it. It's a comfort read, okay?
Yeah. Dude's jaw just went.
Yeah, but so I gave him like some very gay books to read, and I was like, here. And then you start to see like he starts to write about, queer characters, and it's coming across, I will give this to Nick a lot, very authentic, because you're diversifying your reading. So I don't know, is that something they ever like talk about, or is there anything that you know of that is like that?
It's definitely something that like people give lip service to, but like at the end of the day, look, Penguin Random House is not in the business of making books. They're in the business of making money for their shareholders, which, even though they might get sort of these, the write-offs and the creating the next generation of readers, they're too short-sighted for that. I am very cynical about sort of the parent companies of the big five, because they're not thinking about that kind of thing. I will say that there are a lot of organizations doing a lot of that work. I think one of the biggest forces for literacy and fostering the love of reading is Dolly Parton. Yeah. Are you aware of the Imagination Library?
Yeah.
I am. Mm-hmm.
Dolly Parton has done more for literacy in this country than any of the big five. I mean, I have friends who represent kids, like picture books, who they're like, it is a dream to be selected for the Imagination Library, which for your listeners who might not know about it, Dolly Parton has a program where anyone, anywhere in the country can sign up for the Imagination Library, and your kid will get a free book every month for the first 5 years of their lives.
So amazing.
And that kind of thing, I feel like, does more to foster literacy and the love of reading than anything else. I would love to see something like that. I mean, I would love to see her continue that, like, into elementary school, into middle grade, into reading. I mean, I just read a really depressing article the other day about there's like the decline by 9, where like after the age of 9, kids like stop, like the reported percentage of kids who like read for fun plummets. And, they might be reading like, but then also like the definition of like reading for fun, people are like, they're not reading novels. It's like graphic novels are also books. Like, it's fun. Like, calm down. But I think that like something like that, like throughout a kid's entire life, I would love to see something like that. So, I mean, this is kind of an unsatisfying answer. I don't know. I don't look to the big five to lead that kind of change, because they're not, at the end of the day, digital companies who will happily publish like Trump books, they'll happily publish books by like known racists, and alongside, books by like people from marginalized communities, and they don't care, because for them, it's about the bottom line. So it's my slightly cynical.
No, I actually really appreciate what you said, because as an English teacher of teenagers for 15 years, it's rough now compared to what it was in the beginning. Yeah. Like, students are very reluctant to read. Very few read for fun. I think with a program like that, I could assign reading. I feel like most of my department feels like we can't assign outside of class reading anymore, because the kids won't do it.
Yeah.
And so we read audiobooks together in class. It took us most of the year to read one novel, but the fact that they were with me with it is exciting. Yeah. We just finished it yesterday. It was amazing. But
I think it's also, I mean, I very consciously decided not to work on kids stuff for a reason, because I don't really understand what the market's doing now. I also have the very strong feeling that a lot of the stuff that is published as YA is not YA. It's like for adults, but like cleaner, like there's less sex in it. And I think that that's not really meeting kids where they are. Like, kids are reading older, I think, which has always been true. Like, you read sort of up a little bit. But I think that the people who are, publishing books for kids aren't really publishing books for kids. They're publishing books for adults who want to read about kids, which is fine. It's just that, like, we can't then expect kids to really resonate with it, because it's not for them,
right.
So, I'll be really interested to see what happens in the next couple of years as they kind of like work through that. I worked on some wonderful middle grade and YA in my time in round 1. Like, Marika Nijkamp is just such a treasure. I think she really gets like the teen mindset, which is wild, because she wrote one of the best books about a school shooting that's ever been written. And she's from the Netherlands, where like the only people who have guns are like farmers. And then there was like Sarah Caput, and she wrote this wonderful book called Get a Grip, Vivi Cohen, which is about an autistic girl who like joins a little league team. And like, I feel like there are authors who are definitely like in touch with that sort of like spirit of childhood, but the industry is sort of like wondering, and they don't really, they want to hit, right? They want like a big thing that can make a lot of money, and they haven't figured out what that is in the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Sure.
Ooh, so exciting. So we're going to just jump in again, I guess. I'm trying to find our spot. We kind of didn't derail. I'm not going to use that term.
Nope.
But I wanted to know a little bit too. So I asked the question, what did you learn from being an editor and freelancing and being a writer that's going to help your agenting round 2? I want to flip that. Being an agent this second time around, how do you think, what are you taking from that to improve your writing and your editing skills?
I don't know that. I mean, I don't really know how this new round of agenting is going to affect my writing because I haven't done a whole lot of it since I started. Sorry, Mom. My mom keeps asking me for book 2, so that's why I said that. I think that I'm just really excited. I don't know. This might be kind of a non-answer. I'm just really excited to be able to see things through in a way that I wasn't able to as a freelance editor. So as a freelance editor, people would, send me their stuff and they'd say like, do you want to work on this? And I could decide like yes or no. And then, I'd give them their feedback and we'd have a conversation. And then I would literally never hear from them again. Like I would often, I think there were maybe 2 people in 3 years, like followed up and told me like, oh, I did X, Y, and Z. I'm self-publishing. I've got an agent. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about is to be able to kind of see something through to the end, like find something at home, get it published, get it into the hands of readers. Because when you're freelancing in that kind of very task specific role, you don't get to do that. So I don't know if that's really an answer. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to take. I don't know a lot of what I'm going to take from being a freelancer because I feel like I'm so new into it that I feel like in like 2 years, I'll be able to give you like a really good answer to that question. But
I like it.
Yeah.
Will?
I think I'm jumping questions ahead because I just need this answered. Sorry, Nick.
Wait. Come on. Don't ruin my flow.
Am I ruining it?
I don't know. It depends on your next question.
You won't know until you
know.
ask the question.
Yeah. All right. So, Jen, my biggest question and concern, right? Because I'm going to start querying in October. That's like my deadline. When you're looking for an agent, and like, I write science fiction and fantasy and like horror and romance, right? So like I want to do multiple genres. But the other things that I've been working on has been like a play that I'm working on. Like when you choose an agent, should you go into it saying, okay, I'm going to have an agent who represents me for my adult genre stuff. And then I need to get an agent for my playwriting. And do I need to get an agent for a screenwriter? Like, how do you think the best way is to kind of go about?
I think that I think you should have an agent for, I feel like prose and playwriting and screenwriting are different. They're different markets. They're different. I wouldn't know the first thing. And my mom runs a theater company. I wouldn't know the first thing to do with a play. I don't know what to ask about. I don't know what the contract terms are. Do you charge royalties? Like how does that work? I don't know. So I think that, when you're querying, it's useful to know that like, you also write plays, you also write screenplays. That's great. But I would say that you don't want to start getting into specializations in terms of like, this person represents my fantasy and this person represents my science fiction and this person represents like my horror, because those are all genres that have like a lot of overlap. And you don't want to get yourself into a position where you're like putting yourself into weird like breach of contract, like with your competitive works clauses, things like that. Like in a, for your listeners, like in a contract with a publishing house, they're going to lay out, you're basically saying, this is the next thing I'm going to write. I'm not going to try and publish anything else in this genre within like a year of this book coming out so that you're not cannibalizing your own sales. And like a good agent will be able to restrict that enough so that like, this will be my next work of fantasy for adults. And, that gives you room to write like science fiction for adults. So you want to have someone that like, I would say that like someone who specializes in prose and someone who specializes in like playwriting and screenwriting, you probably want to have, different people for that.
Thank you so much.
He's been dying all night to ask that. I can see it.
Yeah, you can tell.
Did that ruin your flow? Is that?
No, we're fine. We're fine.
fine.
So I don't. So I want to get into some of this because I know I would love to do a full Q&A with you too, and I'm being mindful of the time that we have here. Gabe kind of hinted at this one too, and you may have fully asked it, but how do you coach writers through having insecurities and things like that around their own editing skills and when they're getting ready to query and send things off?
I mean, with my writers, well, so there's two parts to this. So when I was freelancing and I was talking to people about it, actually, I guess there's just one answer. The way that I do it is by giving as much information as I can. I try, when I was freelancing and I was talking about a project and I was trying to give give feedback and edits on a book, I'd say like, this is what's working, this is what's not, and this is why what's not working is important. And this is why you might want to think about doing X, Y, and Z. Because I feel like a lot of times when authors are anxious about something, it's because they just don't know what's going to happen. And I can't obviously predict the future, and I can't, guarantee what's going to happen. Like, oh, if you do X, Y, and Z, it's absolutely going to sell. You're absolutely going to get an agent. But I can provide context on like why, in my experience, beginning a book with someone waking up and then describing themselves in the mirror is like a really kind of uninspired choice. I can give that kind of context, or I can talk about like the market of like, okay, you're doing this, but like, it's in this, you're writing in this tense, but like you might want to consider writing in this one because like this is what's working a little bit better and it's not going to substantially change like the story you're trying to tell. Because I think that fundamentally a lot of anxiety is just about lack of control, about lack of, knowledge about the future, knowledge about what's going to happen, how are people going to react? And by being kind of forthright, but not like cruel about, feedback, I feel like I can kind of assuage a lot of those anxieties. So like when I'm working with a client, as an agent, I'm like, all right, this is what the submission process looks like. I send these emails. I follow up at sort of these intervals. This is the kind of information I give them. This is the kind of information that they might want down the road. So I kind of try to prepare them for like a long ass wait, because God knows it takes forever. But also so that they'll know the kinds of questions that they might be called upon to ask if someone's interested in the book. Because I feel like that's it a lot of time. It's just like, what's going to happen? I don't know what that's going to look like. So, which is totally legit. I actually, as part of my sort of administrative responsibilities in this new job, I've been working a lot with one of our younger agents at the agency who is about to go on submission with their very first book. And it's very exciting. It's a very cool sounding project. And they were very nervous because they were like, well, what happens if I get an offer? And I was like, oh, you sweet summer's child. Like, oh, no one's told you. Like, what happens? You say nothing. And then you go and you think about it for a little bit and decide what you want to ask for. But they just didn't know and so they had a lot of anxiety about it. So I think that's just how I approach it, is just trying to be like as supportive and informative as possible.
Oh, I like that. Now I want to know, this isn't listed, what's your favorite part about working with an author, or a favorite process? I
mean, my favorite day is always when I get to call people and say someone wants to buy your book. Nothing beats that feeling. Actually, one thing beats that feeling. The day that Marika Nijkamp hit the New York Times bestseller list and the day that she hit number 1, I cried. She wasn't crying. I was crying. To be able to deliver good news is like the best feeling. But it's also like, I really love talking through edits with a client, especially if it's on something that I feel really passionate and excited about. And for example, in my client that I'm working with now, she had all these extremely devastating sentences where I was just like, oh God, like that hit me like in the heart. And the way that I say that, I don't know if it's because I'm from Texas or what, I'd just write, oof. Oof. And she was like, I couldn't tell if you thought that the sentence was bad or if it hurt. I was like, no, it hurt my heart. I was like, that was positive. You did good. I just like was real sad.
Oh, I love that.
I love being able to talk through edits. I love being able to deliver, good news. I mean, it's hard to deliver bad news, right? It's hard to say like so-and-so passed, especially if it's for like a stupid reason. I remember one of the editors who passed on Chelsea Summers's A Certain Hunger, my cannibal book, was like, she's just too good at writing gore. And I was like, there is barely 3 murders in this whole book. Like, it's not a grand guignol fest of like stabbing over here. Like, what the fuck? I was so mad.
I'm sorry. Too good at writing gore.
Too good at gore. Too good at gore. That's one of those books where like people would come up to her and be like, "Oh, I tried to buy that," and she's like, "No, you didn't. I know you didn't."
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Gabe?
So I was thinking, like, how much of that editing process and that back and forth is like you assuaging the insecurities of a writer? Yeah.
I mean, it depends. Like, you know, the thing about the process is that it really depends on how things have gone for the author before, because so much of it is not even about the book. It's about what they've been through up to this point. So, you know, a client, maybe I'm their second or third agent and haven't had a good experience before. So a lot of it is about just affirming, like, I like this book. The reason I'm saying that I think we need to do this work is because I like it. Me giving this feedback is not me hating the book. It is, I genuinely like this book. I think it's great. I think it could be even better if you do X, Y, and Z. A lot of the assuaging really comes at the submission phase, like when we're starting to get those passes, when we're starting to get those, like, I just didn't like connect with the characters. That was actually one that we got with Dail a couple of times, where people were just like, I just didn't like understand the characters. It was just like, well, you're a coward, is what you are. Like, you just
didn't you experience some of that too with Maurice's Knights of Breton Court?
Well, I didn't sell that. He had sold that on his own. He sold that on his own, and I represented him afterwards. So he had done that. But, you know, we had his. You know, there's always going to be like weird feedback, but like there's a couple of people who passed on Sweep of Stars because they just didn't connect, and I was just like, interesting. Just making a note of that.
Oh, this is one of the times I wish we did video recordings as opposed. That was great. Marshall?
I don't want to mess up the next part. So why don't we do you want to get to the last section since we're going to run out of time?
No, do you think that last section will be on the next episode? Because
it's related to that. That's why I'm saying that.
Yeah, ask your question.
Okay.
You're fine.
So we were talking about, you know, working with writers and where they're at and what you like about it. And I loved hearing that. I've noticed in my community, some of us, you know, have written novels and we're like really excited about it. But like, if the anxiety around querying because you feel like it's not ready, not good enough, not whatever, like, I guess for our listeners, I know a lot of our listeners are in that early writer stages too. Like, what could you say to like encourage them to kind of maybe do it anyway? I guess is what I'm saying. Like, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is if they only have a chapter, sure, don't query. But if you have a book done, like, should you just do it anyway? Like, I think you should do it anyway. I would always encourage people to, you know, get secondary feedback if you can, like get a beta reader, you know, of course, have someone else read it just to, you know, assuage whatever. But, you know, you're not losing anything by querying. You know, I feel like writers are worried about like wasting their shot. Like, oh, I only get one chance we forget so much. I have 600 queries in my inbox and you know, the only things that I remember are the really insane ones. Like one guy wrote this whole query to me and sort of like, methinks thou dost want. Like, I remembered that and I was like, this is insane. I don't want to, what is this? What the fuck? Like, I'm only going to remember something like so egregious. And if you write a book that's like not all that great, I'm just going to reject it and I'm going to move on. And then you have another chance because we're like goldfish. We forget. But we read so much. We just forget. And I think that's my question is, and then it might work. And then, you know, great. Yeah. I think that's what the anxiety is around is like, do we have another shot? Like you have your ideal agent up there and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to do this, but it's got to be perfect or something. So you absolutely do. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, 90% of the time, the stuff that I sign needs work, sometimes significant amounts of work because there's really only so far you can take something on your own. Yeah. You know, even with freelance editors, even with beta readers, like there's really only so far you can take.
I, as an industry insider, have a little bit more insight into what makes a working book, like what makes a book that will hopefully go to a good publisher, that will hopefully go for a lot of money. So if a book isn't there, I'm not mad. Yeah. I'm just like, okay, there's some work to do. Like that's totally expected. So if it's like perfect, I'm like, well, what do you need me for? You know, I feel like I would rather have a book that's like ready for me than it's like ready for like prime time, if that makes sense. And, you know, obviously if something comes to me fully formed that I'm obsessed with and I'm, you know, I'm like, great, perfect, we're going out tomorrow. Like, I'm not mad about it. But things absolutely don't have to be perfect. I would like them to be in reasonable shape. I would like them to be, you know, book shaped. I would like for everything to make sense. I would like for the middle not to have, you know, a complete lack of tension. And I would like it to have a good emotional climax. But like, it doesn't need to be like ready for copy editing, if that makes sense.
It does.
It doesn't.
No, it does make sense. And thank you for saying it.
I was like, no, it doesn't. I was so impassioned. I was like ready. I was ready to fight. But I was like, no, it does make sense. Great.
I mean, that's super encouraging.
It is.
That just like relieved so much stress off my plate. I'm in Will's boat. Like I want to be querying by August, September. Mm-hmm. I'm in a slump, but you know, that's kind of the goal there. Yeah. And it's like, and that's one of the things I fear is like, I know I can only bring it so far. Have I brought it far enough to be query readable? Because so Marshall and I just graduated their MFAs last year. And that's kind of like the thing that we harped on a little bit, was making sure you're ready for query. And it's like, dude, I'm so far away. But hearing that, like, there's only so much you can do. There's a certain level of expectation there on that one. Helps out a lot.
Well, and I feel like, you know, we're pretty understanding. Well, I feel like I've always been pretty understanding about the fact that like querying is such a weird animal. Like you have to somehow suddenly be incredibly good at writing marketing copy. Like if I get a query that's kind of like mid, but the idea sounds okay, I'm like, all right, like let me read the pages, you know. I almost always read the pages anyway, because I understand that like writing good marketing copy is not a skill that they teach you in MFA school. It's not a skill that you learn when you're learning how to write a good book.
Right.
And, you know, it's great if you can write a good query, but it's not the end of the world. Right. And we're also very understanding about the fact that like, you know, we have spent, you know, years learning how to make a good book. We've spent years learning how to turn something into something that like can be sold to the public. So why would we blame y'all for not knowing how to do that? Like, it's our job to know how to do that. It's not your job. It's your job to write a good book and our job to like help it be a better book.
Makes sense. Right. Will?
This is a question that maybe we'll have to take for the next part, but I guess my question is, when you're working with marginalized writers, how do you set expectations? Like, I find it like for a lot of like queer writers and like queer people of color, I had an agent say to me about something I queried that was recommended to me from an editor at she's like a big editor-in-chief. We go to the same gym. And one of the agents said to me, well, you can only get so far money-wise, monetarily, writing queer books.
Well, that person was incorrect.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is like, I try to set expectations with everybody, right? Because there's never a guarantee with any author of any background, of any kind of advance, of any size. You literally never know. You can have a sense of like, I feel this could be a big book, but you literally never know. So I always try to say like, this is my goal. Like, I would like to place us at this kind of house. I would like us to be in this range of an advance. We might not get there. We might, but I feel like with all of my clients, I try to make sure that the people that I'm sending the book to are people that are going to support that author's journey. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily always mean like a one-to-one matchup of like identity, but like I would hope that by finding an author or by finding an editor to pair with an author that, you know, is actively seeking that kind of book, because even if they're not from that background, seeking that kind of book, it means that they're trying to do the work of like being someone who like increases the the diversity and the inclusion of the industry. Like I had an editor tell me the other day, and I was like delighted to hear it, that they will actively like downgrade like white authors. Like they'll be like, this is not at the top of my to read pile. And I was like, that's legit. That's the way you do it. Like you don't have to prioritize everything like by the time it came in. Like if you're actively seeking to find these authors from these backgrounds that like are going to expand the genre, are going to expand, the inclusion and things like that, like, yeah, you can prioritize that. So I try to be very strategic in sort of who I send to. Like, I don't want to send someone, from a sensitive background who is, to like a white weirdo, like there's people that I actually just straight up won't send things to anymore, but that's a story for another time, for when we're not.
Yeah, right.
For when we're not recording.
Well, see you in 5 minutes conversation.
Yeah, the when we hang up conversation and I get myself a glass of wine, like that's what happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I basically like, because publishing has so few guarantees, I try to set my clients up for success. I try to give them as much information as I can. And what I also try to do is, if we get an offer and it might be a little bit less money than I want, but it comes with, say, like a big marketing budget. They're like, we're going to do all of this stuff. I'm like, okay, smaller advance isn't great, but that means that if they do all the stuff that they say they're going to do, you're going to earn out faster. And that means royalties down the road, which means like ultimately more income. So I guess that, I don't know if that answers your question. I just try to give as much information as I can, and like for all of my clients, like but also you never know what's going to happen. Like with, with This Is Where It Ends, the Marika Nijkamp book, it was a very small advance, but that just meant that when it did really well, she earned out in like 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
I mean, that's not bad. I would not complain.
Yeah. Still get some checks from that. So not huge ones, but like I get them. So
I like it. For the sake of time, right? We're at the hour mark of recording here. We did not even tap into some of our querying questions, which I guess stay tuned for part 2 with All Things Jen, where we want to do a full question and answer. We're going to take some questions from the community. We have like 7 questions we didn't even get to tonight, all about querying and what to look for, how to find agents, how to best prepare ourselves and things like that. So community, jump on our Discord, email me, email any one of us your questions so we can bring it to Jen. You've got 2 weeks to do that from the time this is being published, and then we'll be able to get it out for you guys and everything like that. Gabe, you have something?
Yeah, I mean, regarding the questions, you can also check out Jen's newsletter. It's awesome. There's so many questions there, and I mean the answers are in depth and with memes. So yeah,
I love it.
Go check it out.
And I'm stoked to have you back again, and to be able to do it again. So
me too.
Let's keep this up. This is awesome.
So
yeah,
let's finalize this last question, Jen. What keeps you just agenting?
Just agenting. I'm just so excited to be back at it. There's nothing like being able to help or being able to be a part of someone's journey to like get their words in front of a larger audience. Like it really feels like a huge, I don't know, like an honor, like to be able to be like, oh yeah, I helped, you got there and I was like a part of that journey. And it's really nice to be part of that again. Like,
no, I was just gonna say, I think our listeners are excited to hear that you're back doing this and encouraging positivity for those of us at various stages of our career. So yeah, thank you. And it's exciting, and we're happy for you and happy to have you back and do this again.
Me too. Yay.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.